AOSIS is proud to be hosting this book launch, Unlocking Knowledge to the World. We are pleased to announce the release of the Theological and Religious Studies Open Access book, How Would We Know What God is Up To? From the Unearthed Faith, telling the story amidst the Anthropocene series. The University of the Western Cape in South Africa has generously supported this publication by AOSIS Scholarly Books. Get a first-hand view of the engaging conversation from its subject specialists.
My name is Kuzipa Nalwamba. I work for the World Council of Churches as Program Director for Unity, Mission, and Ecumenical Formation. And I am going to be the interviewer of the panel.
And my name is Conradie. I'm a senior professor in the Department of Religion and Theology at the University of the Western Cape, and I'm a series editor for this series.
Yes, and I'm Cynthia Moe-Lobeda. I'm professor of Theological and Social Ethics at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary and the Church Divinity School of the Pacific and the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And I'm founding director of the Center for Climate Justice and Faith at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. I'm a co-editor along with Ernst Conradie of this volume.
This volume is a series, is part of the series, Unearthed Faith, telling the story amid the Anthropocene. Could you say how this volume fits into the series, Ernst?
Thank you, Kuzipa. Yes, the notion of unearthed faith needs to be understood in terms of ecotheology, Christian ecotheology. We're using the symbol of earth as in electricity to indicate that it needs to touch the grassroots, it needs to be down to earth, as it were. The notion of telling the story is the story of who God is and what God is doing in the world as seen from a Christian perspective. And this particular volume then deals with issues of method. It's the second volume in the series, whereas the first volume dealt with basic questions in theology. This volume deals with issues of method.
Cynthia, there are 9 contributors to this volume. What do they each bring to the volume, and what does the collective bring to it?
We were blessed to have this group of theologians give their expertise and creativity to this project. In considering potential authors, I was haunted by a question that erupts out of a conundrum. And it's this, that the deadly myths undergirding colonialism also are the building blocks of Western intellectual paradigms, including theological method. And by that I mean 4 myths: the assumed superiority of whiteness, secondly, the assumed superiority of people with wealth, third, the inevitability of economies that prioritize maximizing profit over human and earth well-being, and fourth, the superiority of humans over the rest of creation. So those myths, having led to such terrible suffering, have shaped consciousness and assumptions and epistemologies and other aspects of theological method. So the question simply erupted. How will ecotheology proceed without reinscribing those very epistemologies and consciousness that is in the DNA of theology, at least theology shaped by those myths? What methodological moves could ecotheology take to help dismantle them? To me, that's a question of life and death, because our knowing of the very force that could save us, that is God, is truncated by those myths. So that brings us to the authors. Part of what we saw was a community of authors that is capable of forging methodological pathways that would subvert those myths that have simply created horror upon horrors. I think that collectively, this body of authors is doing that, and I am grateful to them.
And Ernst, why is it important that the contributors to this volume represent a diversity of context, confessional traditions, language, age, and different theological institutions?
Yes, Kuzipa, the idea is of the series is to optimize diversity in terms of perspectives. This has to do with a way of doing theology that is no longer so-called Lone Ranger research, where you sit on your own and read books and then produce texts. When we deal with the kind of questions that we deal in this series, we need to do so collectively, collaboratively, in conversation with one another, across the many global divides that characterize our world. So certainly the North-South divide comes into play, but also the different continents. So we're trying to optimize diversity in terms of different contexts. All the main continents are typically involved in the series, and certainly also in this volume, but also confessional traditions that divide Christianity itself and the many theological schools that are involved. And then we are also trying to take into account issues of gender, of course, race, of course, class, to the extent that it is possible, but also age, in the sense that we want to bring in younger scholars, emerging scholars that can contribute. And then the interesting thing about this particular volume is the issue of language. Of the 9 contributors that we had, only 2 have English as their home language. So the language diversity, even though it's not obvious in the text, does play a significant role because of the tendency for English to become hegemonic. And so we also take that into account in selecting authors. And in this case, the authors really came from multiple different contexts, which creates a challenge of its own to get them all on the same time zone for meetings. It's really not so easy to do, but then at the same time, extremely exciting to see the kind of diversity that it brings.
Thank you. And in your chapter, Cynthia, you speak of 3 methodological moves for ecotheology, namely elevating the subjectivity of other kind, and accounting for the inadequacy of reason, as well as reclaiming sources that colonialism dismissed. How much of that has this volume achieved, and what still remains to be done?
The authors in this volume were not asked explicitly to address those methodological principles, but in fact they did model amazing steps into them. For example, Jochebed Solano artfully raises earth as a theological source. Maini Natalia and Jaya Sophia O and George Zachariah centralize subaltern communal knowledge. Lorene Massano allows stories and folklore to put reason in its place. Heather Eaton offers clues to honoring Earth's subjectivity. Guillermo Kerber's call to liberate theological epistemology is a kind of theoretical backdrop for revisioning method in ecotheology. So I have learned from all of them about the meaning of these principles that I've put forth. That said, this book and all of our work is but a step along a path. That path into method that subverts those 4 myths has life and death import, because those myths sabotage communion. And in recent years, I have come to perceive communion as, in Willie James Jennings' words, God's dream, or what God wants. I'm guided in that understanding by Jennings in his book, After Whiteness, also by the 2nd century theologian Irenaeus of Lyon, and also by feminist physicists and by biologists. If communion is what God intends for earthlings, human and other, then myths that destroy communion are no small problem. As far as I can tell, the methodological moves that you mentioned and that my article suggests may help to counter those myths. So I think we have made steps into those methodological moves, and there's a long way to go. It seems, yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Yeah. Well, the aim of the project is to ensure that this becomes a foundational text, that is going to, initiate conversation. And I saw in the introductory part of the book, you actually claim that, you would like for those who think in the ecotheology realm to use this, as a foundation. So finally then, to both of you, this volume raises questions about theological method, sources, and interlocutors of Christian theology, and about Christian theology's aims and starting points. And you speak of current paths that you have charted in this volume. And you also say that, its limitation is that there are still new horizons that remain for future exploration. Could you just speak to that?
Let me start. Thank you, Kuzipa. The idea of current paths and emerging horizons was picked up from the project on Christian faith and the earth that was taking place a decade or so ago. And that became catchy in order to discern which are the current paths on issues of method and where are the emerging horizons. To me, what was striking is that the notion of a path itself became indicative of method. The very word method in Greek means meta, hodos, about the road. And therefore the idea of traveling on a road, and I would say a road with a destination that is not predetermined, whether you will actually reach the destination is not clear. Maybe the road is on an uncharted territory, but you have some tools with you, and you have companions, and you have a sense of guidance and direction. And that by itself seems to be the kind of path that has emerged. What is also striking is that in ecumenical theology, especially ecumenical ecotheology, we have long worked with the idea of oikos, the whole household of God, as a kind of root metaphor for how we need to think. But it now seems that alongside this metaphor of the household of God, we also need the metaphor of the road, the idea of a pilgrimage, an ecumenical pilgrimage, a road which we need to travel together. We do have maps, and we do have companions, and we have some tools, and in a way, I think this volume helps us to understand what it would take to travel together. And of course, the image of the road also suggests then that as you walk along the road, new horizons open up to your surprise, pleasant surprise, hopefully. You see where the path may be going, and you need to adapt as you go along the route. So for me, that was a striking methodological conclusion, that this metaphor may be richer than we may have thought when we started.
Yeah, thank you, Kuzipa, for the question, and Ernst for your response. I think that these authors in this volume have indeed stepped into a kind of communal journey that is perilous and also liberating. It's the quest, the journey to catch a glimmer of how it is that we human earthlings are to go about sensing what this holy mystery is up to, so that we can join in with that liberating, healing force of magnificent love in its all-out passion to bring abundant life for all, or to render communion. That is, if we are called to participate in what God is doing, then we, as our faith forebearers in millennia past, are charged with hearing or seeing or sensing what on earth this radiant sacred source is doing. We're charged with also receiving that spirit so that we have the strength and the courage and the wisdom to join with her. Those are the astounding tasks of theology. And how we are to go about them is the question of theological method, the question that this book tries to probe. So this quest to catch a glimmer of that how travels through confounding and freeing paradoxes. I had to look up the plural of paradox because it's paradox. For example, the paradox that theological method shaped by imperial and colonial frameworks is severely malformed by the myths of white superiority and human superiority and wealth superiority and the acceptability of predatory economic life. Yet paradoxically, we also are magnificently formed with the collective capacity to cut the power lines of those malformative myths. In a second paradox on the path, we humans bear the capacity for both brutality and beauty of breath-stopping magnitude. Theological method must acknowledge both. So enough of paradoxes. We could talk on and on about them. They are, though, that reality of paradox is one horizon that must be explored on the quest to ecotheological method. That quest is more urgent and more consequential now than ever before in human history. Because we are in the brink of too late for many human quests. It behooves us all, it seems to me, to continue forth in seeking to know how to know God. To do so with some kind of utter trust that regardless of what the future holds, we all and all of creation are forever embraced by this one who will bring abundant life for all. These are the challenges and the astounding beauties of exploring ecotheological method that we've tried to honor in this text. So thank you, Kuzipa, for these marvelous questions.
Thank you to you both for the conversation.
Thank you. As you explore the book and its contents and any queries arise, please reach out to the editors via contact details provided within the book. We value the time you have invested discussing this book's discourse and anticipate the grand heights this book will reach.